Squirrels! So hello, and welcome to another Legends of Runeterra video. My name is Chris, and today we will be talking about the followers and spells that I think could use with a buff. This video is sort of coming out alongside one for the champions, so if you have not seen that yet, champions that need a buff that is, go and check that out. There also exists a cards that need to be nerfed video. This is all in time for the recent balance patch. Now this video and the last ones contain more cards than I'm expecting them to. Of course, they're more conservative, but these are cards that I think just in general could use a change, and I'm sure there's ones I would have missed. Of course, there's so many followers and spells in the game that I'm sure I just overlooked one, missed it as I was going through the cards, so be sure to leave your suggestions. If I have missed any out, I won't take any offense, don't worry. You have to remember that certain cards, even if they may look a bit bland, I personally didn't put them on the list because maybe I thought, well, for newer players, they might need just a simple card to, just exist, one that doesn't have a lot of text on it so that they kind of understand what's going on. So, maybe not every card is on there that you perhaps would expect, but let me know what you think of my changes, and feel free to suggest your own as well. So now we're going to go into the follower portion of the suggested changes, and we're going to start with our boy Bubble Bear. I'm going to go rattle through these probably a bit quicker, and I'd love Bubble Bear to just say, every time you attune, give me 1 extra attack. His health stat might need to come down, therefore, to like 4 or something, but it would make him a more synergistic card. I think it would be really cool. It would give him some use. He'd come down as a 3 mana 1/4 with elusive. Seems pretty fair to me, and every time you attune, you get extra attack, making him a viable threat as well. Next up, the Siren, and I think of all the ships, this is the one that I think I've never really seen played, and you have to ask, well, why is that? And I think it's because 7 mana is just a bit too much for what Misfortune decks generally want to be. So I think a reduction in mana cost would really help out the Siren in that regard, in that, Misfortune decks are obviously probably going to be pretty aggressive decks, so how do you, fit it in? Well, you have to reduce the cost to make sure that it fits in within those aggressive decks that normally end on around turn 6. So I would reduce the Siren to 6. Obviously, you might need to tinker with the stats, bring them down a bit to, have them in line with a 6 cost. But I think that would also greatly help the card. You can keep the text, it's fine, it works with Misfortune, I guess. But I think that would help the card just see a bit more play. Next up is your boy Vanguard Lookout, and this card is kind of a funny card, right? Like, I remember when Boom Karuki was a 1/4 as well, and you had this just vanilla 2 mana 1/4 out there. To me, this seems so obvious. Give him Scout. He's a Lookout. Scout. You see how it's all coming together? I don't think it would make him too good. Like, you're essentially dealing 2 damage. It would work well with things like Misfortune, or in any sort of Scouts deck. It might fit within that realm. But everywhere else, it would be, 2 damage. It's like, whatever, I don't care. Even you might even be able to block this, right? It wouldn't be that great of a card, but it would help the card, and it might see some play in Scout's deck. Another card I don't think I've seen really anyone play is Feral Mystic. Now, I'm sure maybe some of you don't even know that this card exists. It's a 2 mana 2/2 Overwhelm. I think you just have to change the stat line of this to be a 2/3 and in line with Start Stomper. You might think, well, why would you give a card, the same stats as another region, but with an extra ability? Well, you have to remember, they're in different regions, so I think that makes it fine. They're in different regions. Different regions do different things. And, it's fine to have a slight power creep within a certain region on another. Now, it's in Freljord, so you might not want to do that, but I think that it would be fine. Stomper obviously has Targon and a bunch of buffs within Targon. Freljord doesn't have the most buffs to work with. It has some, of course, but not like continual buffs, not granting buffs. That's not so much that thing. Whereas obviously with Targon it works a bit better. And so, this card I don't think again would be great with that, but I think it would help the card just feel a little bit better. Next up, Avarosan Marksman. Now this is a card that has seen some play in old Ezreal Freljord decks, and I don't think it's the worst card in the world. I just think that a 3/1 for 3. Would anyone have any problem with making this 2? I think it would make it, a good card if it was a 3/2, and could deal 1 to any enemy. So that's kind of what I'm hoping they do with the card. I think it would, you know, just bring it in line with a bunch of other 3-drops, and be, you know, overall a pretty solid card. Bull Elnuk. Now you might think, why is this on this list? You know, it's a 4-mana 4/5. That's a pretty good stat line. You know, it it used to see play in the old Troop of Elnuks. But I can't claim originality on this. I can't claim that this is my idea. Let's find the right words. I'm a native English speaker and I can't even speak English. But Bull Elnuk, I think this is a really cool idea, and I saw someone else suggest it on Reddit, I think, and I can't remember who it was, so I'm really sorry, but this was a really cool idea, so I'm stealing it. Is to make Bull Elnuk, when your board, say, has like 5 Elnuks on it, or 4 or 6, you know, whatever you want to make it, is that you give Bull Elnuk Overwhelm. So essentially, if you have a big horde of Elnuks, they get Overwhelm, and I think that would be such a cool change to Elnuks, and it would make the deck like, oh wow, now it makes sense to build a board of Elnuks, because now if they're all getting Overwhelmed, and you know, maybe you give them all buffs, and you know, you just go crazy, and I would try it out. Who wouldn't try that deck out? So I think that would be a really, really, really cool change. Now we come to Usgar the Ancient, a card so bad I haven't even crafted 3 of them. You might say, and I have seen some people like experiment with this card, but I really do not think it is good enough. It's my personal opinion that 8-mana cards should be more like the Leviathan and Riptide Rex than they should be like Usgar the Ancient. To me, it's not that Riptide or Leviathan or Farron are problematic. To me, Captain Farron is like where all 8-drops should be. It's a good card. It can win you the game. Anything 8+ mana should be able to sort of say, I'm going to win the game. Maybe not this turn, but, you know, I'm going to change this game. And obviously something like Usgar the Ancient just doesn't quite do that. Obviously you could give him Overwhelm, and I think that would be a fine fix. I don't think many people would have a problem with that, to be honest. He's still, you know, Ruination, Vengeance, anything that, you know, anything that kills a unit still kills him. So it's still, you know, you're still potentially trading down big time with anything like that. And so I honestly don't think anyone would have that big a problem with something like that. And it would mean that he then has the potential to actually win a game, rather than just sort of slowly trading with, you know, useless units. On to Trevor Snoozebomb, and this is a card that I'm surprised that they printed. I would have thought by now they would have known that, you know, printing a 3-mana 0/3, unless it does something incredible, isn't gonna cut it. Particularly if its whole idea is that it has to attack. And they probably did that because they're scared of elusives. Is probably what I thought. But the card just isn't good enough. It's nowhere near good enough. You could make this a 0/5 and I still don't think it would see play. I think you just have to buff the stats on this card pretty significantly, or, you know, make it a 2-drop, and even then it probably might not even see play. You just have to really give this card some juice, because I think this is probably one of the worst cards in the game. Because it just doesn't do anything. It just dies. You attack with it, it dies. Well done. Please, please, please change this card. Please. The ability might be cool, but Trevor ain't it. So on to Minna Swiftfoot. And my big problem with Minna is just, I think the ability is fine. You could maybe buff the stats as well. This is a 9-mana card. You could make this 8 mana. And I think that would be fine. I think a big problem for me is just changing this from a skill, a play effect, to just like play, this happens. There is no skill. You know, forget this Skyward Strikes thing. It just happens. You know, there is no reactivity. There is no glimpse beyond for them if they want it. You know, it comes down, happens, like Ionia does. Does Ionia do that? I'm pretty sure he does, right? And it just happens. And I think that would be a welcome change to Minna Swiftfoot. Now we come to Trifarian Hopeful. And this is one that I think I have a bit of an interesting opinion on this card. And I think I'd be interested to see what you guys think. Personally, I am a fan of the Allegiance keyword. I think Allegiance is a pretty cool keyword in general, and promotes different deck building. Now, of course, each region only has one allegiance card, but would it be a problem if they added in like 2 mana allegiance cards as well? Personally, I don't think so. And so I think Trifarian Hopeful would be like a prime example of a, you know, an example of a card that could be an allegiance card, and it would just read the same, but with allegiance, you know, grant me the extra attack rather than, you know, the other way around. And, you know, I think that that would be a cool change. It'd be a neat change. It would mean that, you know, you don't have to have a 1-drop. It would probably fit within a slightly maybe slower deck. But I just think it would make the card, you know, somewhat significantly better, in that you're not relying of having another Noxus ally. It kind of is an allegiance effect if you look at it this way, but it's kind of just an easier, I'm giving it just an easier way of triggering. On to Trifarian Shieldbreaker, and I've suggested this change before, and I really do like it. In borrowing an effect from Terror of the Tides, where you make Trifarian Shieldbreaker give an enemy unit less attack, whether it be 1, 2, probably 2 would be the maximum. You just give it to 1 unit. You just say, you know, this unit gets 2 attack every time it attacks. I think that that would be a really cool change. Because obviously he's a shield breaker, he's fearsome. It's like, you know, I'm challenging you and you're scared of me, so I get to attack you. I think that would be a really cool change, and also significantly improve the card. In a similar sort of vein, Savage Reckoner, what are we doing here? What are we doing, my friend? This card, I don't think anyone has ever played this card. It has some, you know, some neat keywords, but I think the 4 health just isn't enough for a 7-drop. You could bring this down to a 6 mana 6/4 if you wanted. Personally, I'd like to see it have at least 5 health. I think that's the only way you can really fix this card, and maybe, you know, maybe that would be enough, but we'd probably have to see. I think this card would have to be, you know, I think even if this was a 7/6, it might not see play. So I think that that would be the bare minimum, is making it a 7/6. Some of you might disagree, but I do think that that probably is like the least that needs to happen for this card. On to Intrepid Mariner, which obviously, again, is another card that I don't think anyone has ever played. There is no reason this needs to say 1. This can absolutely say 2, and it would be perfectly fine, and would be a pretty solid 2-drop if it did in the right deck. So that is my suggestion for this change. Please make this a 2 mana 2/3 to make this ever worth playing. And now we come to Golden Crushbot, obviously a 3 mana 2/5, a card that has just been there. Again, some of you might not know this exists. And I think I've suggested this change before. Obviously, Crushbot makes me think it was probably designed with Heimerdinger sort of in mind. And I don't see why this can't be a 3 mana spell that says summon a Golden Crushbot. Obviously, that makes it, 1, easier to play, and that, you know, you only need spell mana. And you could also, you know, potentially even play it on turn 2. But again, I don't think that would be a problem. You know, a 2/5 on turn 2, like, yeah, it's a solid body, but it's not gonna, you know, it's not gonna win a game. And I think that would be a very relevant change that would obviously synergize better with Heimerdinger and probably P&Z as a whole. Back Alley Barkeep. Well, this of course has the same problem, as that you can't have a 4 mana 3/2 unless you're doing something very special, and I don't think this card is doing anything, you know, too special. To improve this card, obviously, firstly I'd make it a 3/3, just to make it sort of in line with any other 3-drop. A 3-drop, 4-drop, sorry. And secondly, I think obviously you could change sort of, you know, the sort of cards that you're getting from this. You know, you can make them a certain mana cost, you can make them from a certain region, you can make them from whatever. And I think that that would be, you know, you could look at that if you wanted to, and potentially suggest changes of like, oh, maybe, you know, you gives you a 3 mana spell from, you know, from your regions, right? And then, you know, you can build a deck around that and think, okay, well, the 3 mana spells in this region and this region are this and this. And I think that that would be a more interesting card, you know, that would allow you to build around it more, as well as probably being a stronger card in general. Another card I don't think I've seen anyone play ever is Eminent Benefactor. And to me, P&Z is probably the worst region in the game right now as I speak on this day. And I think a decent sized region is most other regions, if not every other region, has some solid 3 mana plays. Now we can go and look at P&Z and just look at their 3 mana units. Let's ignore the champions. And if you look at some of these 3 mana, so what have we got here? Amateur Aeronaut, Assembly Bot, Golden Crush Bot, Parade Electro Rig, Patrol Wardens, Peddler, Sump Dredger, Cast Salesman. Now, Cast Salesman is an okay card that fits certain decks, but perhaps not others. Peddler obviously fits Mushroom decks and is a fine option for them. Sump Dredger is okay. But really, you know, when you look at those options, you're probably going, whoa, I didn't realize it was that bad. And to me, Eminent Benefactor would be a great way if this was a 3 mana 3/3. I know PNZ doesn't normally have the most solid stats, but I want to make an exception, and just to improve the region as a whole, give them a solid 3-drop that, you know, again, you can change this Last Breath effect to be, you know, epic card from your regions, you know, or a certain cost or whatever. You can change this slightly, maybe make it a bit worse even, but at least give them like, hey, here's a solid 3-drop PNZ, because they just do not have one at all right now. Next up is Shady Character, and this I think is similar to Minnow, where you just need to remove this skill and just make it an effect. It just happens immediately, because obviously if your opponent interacts with it, then you've got a 4 mana 1/3. Like, say if they glimpse beyond their own unit, then obviously you end up with just nothing. You've paid 4 mana for a 1/3 and they've drawn 2 cards. Like, that's just such a terrible trade that you should just never want to be able to do that. So I think if you change this, I still think it would be a very fringe card, but it'd be probably more playable and probably more fun as well. Next up is Sump Snipe Scavenger, and I think that another problem PNZ has had is that it has the worst allegiance card, and has done throughout the entire game's history. I don't know what is so bad about this card. Like, in essence, it sort of reads as a 4 mana 4/3. It just doesn't do, I think, what PNZ wants. Like, if this was in Ionia and that was the Ionia allegiance, that would see play. But it just isn't doing what PNZ wants or needs. Personally, I would make this create sort of 2 random spells in hand, you know, from a certain range perhaps within PNZ. I think that would make a lot more sense. Because that's more in line with what PNZ generally wants to do. Whereas, you know, the Sumpworks map, I get that it kind of works with the character, but, you know, you could make this be one of the spells that it could get. I just think that it's just not really what the region is trying to do, and so therefore, you know, just hasn't seen much play because it doesn't fit within an Allegiance PNZ deck. Next up is Chem Punk Shredder, and this is a card, again, I think, you know, the effect is fine, right? The cost is probably about right. I think if this was less, you know, maybe it'd be a bit too strong, although, you know, you could make an argument. I could see an argument for making this 4 mana. But personally, I don't mind it at 5. I think the problem is this number here is just a little too low to ever warrant seeing play. If this was 4, would it be too good? Perhaps. If it was 3, would it be too good? Probably not. So I think this card you just need to play with and tinker with, whether 3 is good enough, whether 4 is too strong. But I think this obviously has to be raised from 2. Whether, you know, would a 4/4 be too strong? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. But I think it would be an interesting card, and would see some play if it had that potential to be a playable card, if you get what I mean. Next up is a personal favorite card of mine, and one that I've seen a lot of people call for a buff, and that is Funsmith. Funsmith, you know, a lot of people have said make it a 2/4. Some people have said make it 4 mana. I would be fine with either change. You know, I really like this card. But I do think if this was a 5 mana 2/4, this would be a pretty strong card. Somewhat, I think, surprisingly strong. I think it would definitely surprise people in a similar way that, like, Neverglade Collector is kind of like stronger than you might first expect if you're coming to the game. I think Funsmith would follow a similar sort of pattern where it would demand dealing with pretty soon. Because, of course, once you play Funsmith, you know, if they then, you know, pass the turn and give you that full mana next turn, you know, they can even Vengeance it. This is kind of the difference between this and Neverglade Collector, and why I think they might have been somewhat reluctant to change this card is because, you know, say they go in to kill your Funsmith, or Neverglade Collector. When they do it to Neverglade Collector, of course, you can maybe glimpse beyond another unit to make damage, but with Funsmith, you know, you can Mystic Shot, Get Excited, Static Shot, you know, you can go crazy on the stack with Funsmith still alive and get a whole heap of damage in. That's obviously going to cause your opponent some problems as well. So, I mean, I hope it gets buffed because it's one of my favorite cards, but I wouldn't be shocked if they didn't, for that reason, that they think, if we buff this might be a bit of a problem. Another card I would love to see buffed is, of course, Minion-Stoke Henchman. If this became a 5/4, it would be really interesting, I think. I don't think it would be crazy, you know, I don't think it would be, like, insanely good, but I think it would just push it enough to where it's like, okay, you can play me in a deck now, and you can go a bit crazy and a bit experimental, and, you know, we can become, you know, a tier 2 deck with the Henchman in there. And that's what I'd love to see, to be honest. I think that would be a really cool kind of new addition to the game. You know, if this became a 5/4, this would be like getting a new card. It happened to Kato the Arm as well, I remember. That used to be a 5/3 and didn't see any play. And now it's a 5/4. It's like, oh yeah, this is a solid option. Not game breaker or anything. Not, you know, not a crazy card that, you know, you see in every deck, but a solid option for a deck. And I think that Henchman would be just the same, and just such a cool idea. And, you know, you make a Tarek Henchman deck and it'd be all over the place, and it'd just be a lot of fun if they buffed this kind of card, I think. And then finally, in PNZ, at least, in fact, actually finally for the whole of the followers, J-Madara. Of course, they removed Elusive from it. It never really made much sense. I guess you can target him with, like, a Sunworks map. And with gems, you know, he's pretty strong. I guess, but I just never felt like he was ever doing enough. And I don't see why they took Elusive from him. I don't think that was a problem. You know, maybe you could give him Elusive and less health. I don't know. Or less attack even. But I don't understand why they took Elusive from him. Like, just give him back Elusive, and then you'd have a card that you'd be like, okay, now with a bunch of gems and whatever, you know, I could turn this into a real both threat and engine. That would be, I think, a neat way to help PNZ as well. So I did actually misspeak. That wasn't the final follower. It was just the final follower within PNZ. We still have some Shadow Isles cards to go through, and the first one is Iron Harbinger, a card that I don't think anyone has ever played. And the reason is, I think, just because, like, it's requiring a lot from you. Like, it's like, hey, play this, then also have Ephemerals down, and then attack with them all. Obviously, that's requiring a lot from you. I think this card would be fixed simply by, you know, when it was played or summoned or whatever, you grant it attack based on how many Ephemerals you've attacked within the game. I think that would make it a decent change. Obviously, it's got Fearsome as well, so you're kind of forcing your opponent to have certain, you know, blockers or whatever, you know, blockers with 3 attack. Otherwise, you know, this could get really high in a certain Ephemeral deck. I think that would help it a lot. You know, you play a 3 mana, I don't know, 8/4. With, you know, with Fearsome, that's a threat, you know, that's a card worth playing, but it's not crazy. I don't think that's a crazy card either, because if you're playing it, you know, by the time you've got this up to 8 attack, and maybe that would have to go down to 1 to sort of, you know, force you to play a very heavy Ephemeral deck, but I don't think that would be crazy enough to, you know, where it would be too good. I think that would just be, you know, a solid card within Ephemeral decks. And finally, a card I dislike so much, I have 0 copies of it. I don't even know how that's possible with how many, you know, different cards I've got, but I have 0 copies of Dust Rider, so yeah, we're gonna keep it at 0. But you all know the card. It's a terrible card. Perhaps one of the worst cards in the game. It's like a worse version of a card that already sees no play. And I would give it a similar effect actually to Trifarian Shieldbreaker, sort of its counterpart, in, you know, in giving opponents less attack. Obviously, this would fit very well with Nocturne as well, and kind of the whole theme of this fearsome aggro deck within Shadow Isles. I think that would then make a lot of sense, and I just think that would be a great change. Forget this whole grant 1 for each time you've activated Nightfall. Make this a 5/5 that, you know, with Fearsome, that when you trigger Nightfall on that turn gives 1 unit less attack. That I think would be a solid change to the card. It would, you know, maybe slightly improve Nightfall decks as a whole, which some of you might be a bit, you know, unsure about, which is fair enough. But, you know, if we bring Pale Cascade down, maybe, you know, we can buff it up slightly as well with a change to something like Dusk Rider. Now just on to a few spells, and we'll start with Shumpo. This to me is a card that, simple change, all it has to do is say deal 2 to an enemy or the enemy Nexus, then rally. Because the problem with this card is if your opponent doesn't have a unit, you actually just can't play this card. Which obviously when you just want a rally effect is kind of important. And so I think it should just allow you to be able to just hit the enemy Nexus as well. Which obviously then kind of goes with the whole idea of rallying and being, you know, aggressive. And would really help the card as well. Because, you know, they can't get out of, you know, oh, I'll just glimpse my unit and then do something. You know, you're going to deal 2 to the enemy or enemy Nexus, you know, and you're essentially getting a Mystic Shot with it. I think that would make the card fine still. And maybe, you know, it would find its way into certain decks. Next we have Unlicensed Innovation. And again, another card that I think people have wanted to change. Now, personally, I'd love for this to, again, say something similar to Crushbot, where it just becomes summon 2 golden Crushbots. I think that would be better than the 5/5 in most cases. Maybe you could argue that it wouldn't be. You could also, of course, just change this to be a 6/5 or 5/6, which I think would also be, you know, a perfectly fine change, and make this card more worth it. And there's kind of a lot of archetypes that are just like, need just one more 6 mana spell from P&Z. You know, Heimer, it would be a big buff to Heimer as well if this card just became a little bit better. So either change this to 5/6 or summon, you know, 2 5s, which is obviously giving you quite a big board presence. Obviously wouldn't be great against Fearsome, but against everything else would be pretty decent. And I think that would be a nice way of changing this card and just making it that little bit beefier. Now we come to True Shot Barrage, and you know what I'm going to suggest for this? I'm going to suggest that you make this fast speed in line with pretty much everything else. Now you might claim, whoa, that might make this card a bit too good. And to that I say, personally, I don't think it would. You know, you think about, like, imagine you get the dream, right? You kill something on 3 with 2 health and with 1 health, all with True Shot Barrage, and then they play Ranger's Resolve. And then you just played 7 mana against 1. So the card would still have weaknesses. You know, your opponent can still do things to react to this in game. Yes, sometimes you would get off a big swing potential, but it also costs 7 mana. And the whole point of playing a card that's, you know, high mana is that you do have the potential to, you know, go very big with it. But as I say, your opponent could always react and, you know, just sort of mitigate True Shot Barrage, and essentially have made you pay 7 mana for nothing. And so I think that the card would still be fine at fast speed. If you are that against it, then you could always say that, you know, it can't hit the Nexus and it can only hit units. That would be one way of changing it if you think it would become too strong at that point. But personally, I don't think it would. If you add it up, it's, you know, it's a Get Excited plus a Mystic Shot plus like a Blade's Edge. And that's obviously only 6 mana, so you're paying the extra mana for, you know, for it all to be encompassed within 1 ability, but it's also slow speed, which doesn't really make much sense to me. Next we have Fresh Offerings, and this will be our last offering of the day. And this is a card that I think could be changed pretty easily and become pretty interesting if instead of Fearsome, Valmore had Overwhelm. Or even both. Give him both Fearsome and Overwhelm, why not? Then it would become like an interesting play, right? You know, you could potentially go like Haunted Relic, summon the 3 Ephemerals, obviously they'll all die, into Valmore. Now, of course, you would have to do that on an attacking turn to ensure that they all die, and then you'd have to play, and you'd have to have 5 mana, so it would be, meh, right? Or you could even, you know, find a way potentially to kill your own units and get this, but I think Valmore needs more of a payoff. Needs more of a kind of like, okay, we're really getting something that's worth value here. Whereas, of course, if you just got this, you know, what, they chum block it with 2 3/3s, it dies. You've had to have 3 allies die. It just doesn't do enough. Whereas with Overwhelm, I think, you know, then you can start justifying, okay, they've got a big threat on the board. How am I dealing with it? Whereas now, you know, you could even up the stats of this as well. You know, go crazy with it. 3 allies dying is pretty hard most of the time. It's not impossible, but you know, sort of waiting for it is pretty hard. So yeah, that's probably what I'd suggest for fresh offerings. So that was the video for followers and spells. As I said at the start, you know, feel free to leave a suggestion about what cards potentially I missed out, or you know, changes that you would make or disagree with, or you know, definitely agree with, or you know, you'd love to see change. Be sure to let me know. As I said, go check out the other videos about the cards that need to be nerfed and champions that could be buffed. They will both be available if you go to my channel, and be sure to leave a like, comment about, you know, whatever you want, and yeah, be sure to subscribe, and that will do it for me. Thank you for watching, and have a really nice day.